Well, thank you everyone for attending this second part of our workshop series. I know it's it takes a lot of effort to get out on a dreary day like this and get out of bed, and I really appreciate you coming. Obviously, we all know that Chautauqua Lake has some issues, or we wouldn't be here today. Chautauqua Lake has been an economic driver, a tourism mecca for many decades, and everyone, including those who visit here, want to ensure that this particular lake system is protected. A little bit of the background on Chautauqua Lake itself, for those of you who do not know. The Chautauqua Lake is comprised of several sub-watersheds that feed water to the lake itself. Those sub-watersheds equal a much larger watershed. I only estimated it's approximately 100 and some thousand acres. I believe it's actually 101 some thousand acres. The lake itself, surface area, is 13,000 approximate surface acres, and the shoreline is 42 miles of shoreline, with approximately 4.5 miles of that shoreline that is what we're determining as undeveloped or state of natural shoreline, vegetated, tree line, etc. So if you put that in perspective, there's very little bit of the shoreline that is actually what we would consider the natural habitat that would allow filtering of nutrients and things of that flow off the watershed before it gets to the lake. The lake is actually comprised of two basins that act very independent of each other. The north basin is deeper, and the south basin, north basin averages a depth of 26 foot average depth, and the south basin 11 feet of average depth. This is important because, as I said, they act very independently of one another. The north basin is relatively deep, and for years has been classified as a mesotrophic water body. I'm going to explain that in a second. There's three basic classifications of lakes. Oligotrophic, which is nutrient poor and low amount of life, generally has a rocky habitat, more like an Adirondack lake. Mesotrophic is the middle or transition stage between oligotrophic and what we're now seeing as transition from mesotrophic into a eutrophic system, which is extremely nutrient rich, high quality of life, a lot of plants, a lot of fish, a lot of life. If you've ever been on the lake itself, you can definitely see the difference in the quality of the water clarity in the north basin, and as you go down to the south, it turns from more clarity to more of a murky system. The north basin flows into the south basin, and the south basin flows out of the Chautauqua, which eventually meets up with the Allegheny, which flows down to the Mississippi and eventually to the Gulf of Mexico. The Chautauqua Lake watershed is actually comprised of a much larger watershed, which is the Conowanga watershed, as I said, which stretches across 3/4 of Chautauqua County and about 1/4 of Cattaraugus County. The point I'd like to raise here is that all these watersheds drain to the lowest point, and what happens in the watershed affects the water quality of the nearest basin that it's attached to. We notice Chautauqua Lake is a very beautiful and wonderful place to visit, recreate, swim, and visit. This would be a typical summer day, calm waters, beautiful environment, and typically this is what we see in the early season. As the season progresses, going to about mid-July to August, we start to see a situation that many of us it's all too common. For decades we've wondered, how is it that we can have such a wonderful lake and then we have the issues that we do? Chautauqua Lake has been something of a desirable area to visit. It started all the way back to the Native Americans, which came to, lived in Chautauqua area in Lake Erie. They commuted via the Portage Trail between Lake Erie shoreline and Chautauqua Lake throughout the different seasons. It was wonderful water quality, fishing, hunting, had a lot of trees. When the Europeans came into the area, we started to notice the same things. We developed our properties and our homes and businesses directly adjacent to these water bodies because we wanted easy access to water and fishing. That has not changed. As I stated earlier, 42 of the 42 miles of shoreline, only 4.5 of those are undeveloped. So since we've been here and recreating, since about the 1800s, there's reports of weeds and weed problems and algal problems. 1930s, it's not changed. 1950s, it was more of a concern. The Chautauqua Lake Association formed. I don't have the exact date. They were the stewards of the lake then and continue to be the stewards of the lake. They are particularly concerned about the aquatic vegetation. So they've been maintaining those in that particular impairment for Chautauqua Lake for many, many decades. This is also the site that you're very, very familiar with. Weeds associated with algae, the piling up of the weeds on the shoreline, which decays into very stinky masses, creating foul odors. Again, the Chautauqua Lake Association is out there most every day helping with these services. This is something, algae is something that we've been dealing with for decades, but it hasn't been nearly the problem that it is over the past. Bill, I'm going to ask you, over the past 5 years, would you say it started to increase?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would say over the past 5 years, but it seems that it's the algal blooms are increasing over the past 2 years, last year being the worst. We've had a number of beach closures. We've had reports of some minor illnesses, more of a dermatitis. I'm not sure if the report was right, but I heard at least one family pet became ill and I believe passed. It's an eyesore. It's a human and ecological problem. It's something that we can't manage for. Once you have algae in a lake, there really is not too much you can do with a lake of our size. Some smaller lakes, there's treatments that you can do. You can aerate the system. You can use alum or lime, things of that to bind with phosphorus and more of an algicide. With a lake such as Chautauqua Lake, that's not an option. But after all these things and looking, how do we fix this lake? And that's been the question for as many years as I can even tell you. It reports all the way back to the 30s. So the issues are ecological health and public health in the lake and watershed. But all those are combined to what we feel is most impactful, and that's on the county and the economic health. The homes around this lake have only increased in value over the past 20, 30 years. We want that those homes to be there and to continue to hold their value. Those taxes, though many of those dollars don't come back here to our county, go up to the state level, but just how government works. But right now, we are having severe deficit problems, particularly at the local level, and the fewer dollars that might come in from these homes if people decide to pick up and leave because the quality of water is not what they expect is only going to hurt this economy even more. In 2005, the county legislature had the foresight to look at all of the groups that were already in existence around Chautauqua Lake. There are several organizations, the Chautauqua Lake Association, Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, Chautauqua Lake Partnerships, Soul Save Our Lake Environment. Several groups were working independently and some collaboratively, trying to do the best they could to help protect this wonderful body of water. In 2005, the legislature formed the Chautauqua Lake Management Commission to bring those bodies or stakeholders together to one table to talk it out and to talk comprehensively on how we're going to manage and deal with the issues and impairments of Chautauqua Lake. The CLMC was formed to develop, implement, and maintain a Chautauqua Lake Watershed Management Plan, which was successfully completed in 2010. Some of those main goals are up here on the screen at this time. I'm not going to read off those lists. But once the plan was completed, there was a list, an extensive list of recommendations from the consulting firm and through various stakeholders who helped develop that plan. Many recommendations were already beginning to be implemented during the development of this plan, such as looking at the watershed to stabilize stream banks, reduce erosion, and prevention of sediment and nutrient loading to the lake. As I said earlier, that phosphorus is the main limiting nutrient that feeds the weeds and algae in Chautauqua Lake. Phosphorus is readily available in our natural soils, but also comes from other areas of the watershed, and I'll get to those a little bit later. The Chautauqua Lake Management Commission was very successful in implementing many of those recommendations, formed an intermunicipal committee, which is going to help address municipal ordinances and things at the municipal level, and that work is already ongoing. Sally Carlson is here in the audience, and so is Don Emhart and several others. I apologize. Normally, I introduce the key individuals in the audience, and I do apologize for that. So many things are going, and one thing I continuously get asked is what's going on in Chautauqua Lake. Well, if you pick up the Watershed Management Plan or look online, there are many, majority of those recommendations are being implemented as we speak. One of those is looking at sources of phosphorus and sediment. The Watershed Management Plan went into great detail. What I'm going to speak to you tonight, and the focus of whatever the rest of the presenters will be talking to you tonight, are specifically the sources from septic systems. I'm going to briefly mention that there are 3 wastewater treatment plants, which Tom Cherry and others will be discussing. The North Chautauqua Lake Sewer District, Chautauqua Utility Sewer District, and Chautauqua State Sewer District in the North Basin. The South and Center Chautauqua Lake Sewer District in the south, denoted by these stars. Here's the 3 up north and here. This one actually discharges primarily to the outlet, which goes down to the Chautauqua. The areas in boxes are the only areas on the lake which are not connected to municipal sewer lines. So approximately 80% of all the homes in the entire, within 1,000 feet, I believe, of the watershed, 80% is on sewer. It's the other small percentage that is still in existence, and those septic systems have been there for quite some time. This is the date at which these facilities were built. This is the users for which that are for each one of these facilities, and some other important information. Of the homes that are not currently on that are not currently on sewer systems, approximately 1,000 homes, and roughly half of those have permits. I know that Bill Boria will go into much greater detail on that. I'm going a little fast here. Of those wastewater treatment plants, though, according to the Watershed Management Plan that was created, and all this was done by models, they estimate approximately 25% of the annual loading of phosphorus to this lake is from those 3 facilities. And then I'll mention there's a 3 from the North Basin and 1 from the south. In 1991, the EPA started looking at classifications and criteria for determining how a lake or waterway would be impaired. Impairment can be anything from phosphorus and nutrient loading, which increases plant and algal growth, which would impair human health impacts and quality of recreation. Other lakes have other similar issues, but others might even have more, such as contaminants, such as heavy metals, organometallics, and things of that nature. The EPA developed this list or document, which was the predecessor of the total maximum daily load, which is what I'll speak about the rest of this talk. The total maximum daily load for Chautauqua Lake, let me take one step back. The EPA was going through and developed the criteria for determining what was impaired and what was not impaired. They went around the country and identified, based on their criteria, what lakes had an impairment or not. Chautauqua Lake was given an impaired status by the EPA and New York State DEC, specifically for phosphorus. Therefore, was put on what is called the 303D list of impaired water bodies. This triggered, at that point, the necessity for a future total maximum daily load to be established for Chautauqua Lake. At the time the Chautauqua Lake Management Plan was being developed, New York State DEC was also in parallel collecting information and developing their document for the total maximum daily load report. This report just was completed, or I call it a document, was just completed in November 2012. It specifically addresses or identifies areas across the watershed, whether it's agricultural, developmental land, septic and sewer treatment plants, and place limits on those particular sources of nutrients such as phosphorus. Specifically, as I said, point sources. Point sources, let me take one more step back. They want to limit the amount of phosphorus coming from the watershed in all sources. Since we cannot measure accurately phosphorus loadings from agriculture and other runoff from the watershed, the DEC actually are the ones that permit the discharge from very specific areas through a state pollution discharge and elimination systems permit. All the wastewater treatment plants on Chautauqua Lake have to have a permit through the state. For many decades now, they have been given a certain allowable amount of phosphorus and other pollutants of concern to be discharged into the lake. These new criteria that the state has come up with looks to have a reduction across the watershed, but also specifically to these point source polluters, these point sources. Some of these lines have moved, transferring from document to PowerPoint, but this big section here is hay and pasture. This whole area is forest. This is the percent land use in the North Basin. Very small section of wetland, quarrying, turf grass, and open water, row crops, and developed land. This would be the percent land use in wetland in the South Basin, forest, developed land, hay and pasture, etc. So if you look between the two, it appears it's very similar. It doesn't change drastically, if you can see. Let's take one step back. So in the watershed management plan and the total maximum daily load by the state, they identified all the potential sources in the watershed and through other sources, how they're entering the lake. We're going to pay attention just to the lake since the watershed drains to the lake itself. The Chautauqua Lake, the Citizens Lake, Citizens Lake, I forget, but Chautauqua Lake Association annually goes out and is part of the CSLAP program through New York State DEC, where they collect environmental data, water quality, clarity, and phosphorus loading. And here are the data in the water column since 1990 to present. In the blue is the North Basin, the south is in orange. This is phosphorus concentration in micrograms per liter. Don't get specific on that, but you'll notice that the blue, being the North Basin, has better water quality, is less phosphorus than the south. And this goes through decades. All of a sudden we get to about 2002, start to increase. All of a sudden 2004, 2006, we're having this increase. This is more alarming of this positive trend. So with the watershed management plan and this total maximum daily load, efforts are going to be to reduce this overall phosphorus level to the state and U.S. Protection Agency's level of 20 micrograms per liter is what they consider the criteria for. Anything below this is a relatively good body of water. Anything above that they classify as impaired. That's a considerable way to go, but it's going to take a watershed level effort across the board to reduce those levels. That includes agriculture, development, septic, and sewer. Here are the estimated sources of total phosphorus loading to the North Lake. I want to point out this groundwater is inclusive of not just groundwater. It's lumping of agricultural to groundwater as well as urban to groundwater. Bill, is that correctly stated?
Yes.
That's the lump right there. Other, so that's 36.7%. Point sources are almost 20%, and those point sources equal the wastewater treatment plants and any other permitted restaurant or other facility that's on Chautauqua Lake that is discharging to the water and requires a speedies permit. Septic systems here in the North Basin say about 3.5%, developed land 1.6, and again hay and pasture 6.5. Internal loading in the lake, that's after many, many years of phosphorus entering from the watershed and getting down to the bottom of the lake, plant die-off and other organics accumulating on the bottom. They account for this percentage of internal loading that might be able to be redistributed through various storms and other turnover events. The South Basin, and here you can take a look, the drastic difference. Internal loading from the South Basin is more significant. It's receiving the loading from the North Basin just by the dynamics of how water flows downhill. The north flows into the south. So you see where groundwater is not as significant. It's only 20.9%. Again, that's inclusive of both ag and urban to groundwater. Septic systems about 1.4. So 3.4 to 1.4%. We believe many scientific persons and other experts believe that the estimates are both low. I'm just going to state that. Right now I'm using 2 to 4%, and that's actually something you can correct in the handouts. I had it at the bottom of one of my slides that said 2% annual from septic. Should be about 2 to about 4%. And Bill, you're going to get into more detail with Finley, right? Or do you want me to state that now? For example, Finley Lake, relatively smaller body of water, less homes. For example, that water body receives 45% of phosphorus from septic systems. It's hard for me to believe that this is that much lower than another smaller lake that is so close in proximity to Chautauqua. These are just the averages of the total phosphorus concentrations from 1990 to 2007. Here's the average Again, here's that 20, down here's the 20 microgram per liter criteria by the federal government that says anything above this is impaired. Most of this information collected for our documents, because it's such a large body of water and testing is expensive across an entire basin. As I stated, Chautauqua Lake is being evaluated once a month, every month throughout the entire year. Chautauqua Lake is very fortunate to have observed data. We know what the concentration is in the north and south basin at a given time of the year. But we also have computer models to help us estimate how those values might be if we were unable to collect. The blue is the observed and the red is simulated. You can see that there are some differences here, but within reason, between 10 micrograms per liter. For whatever reason, our observed values over the past couple of years have been significantly different than simulated. For whatever reason, over the past several years, we are having more phosphorus coming into our system than we anticipated. Basically is what this means. Since about right around 2000 or so, something's changing. There is a phosphorus, a source that is coming into Chautauqua Lake that we were not anticipating. As I said, these are true samples taken from the field, and here's our estimates. That's just for the north. And then the south, similar trend. Again, right around 2000, for whatever reason we're missing a sample there, starts to increase, but for whatever reason the past several years, those trends have changed. Total phosphorus load allocations for Chautauqua Lake in the North Basin. Right here, they're estimating, as I said, phosphorus can come from the land and organics, but the change in how much of this material and nutrients are getting to the water body have increased significantly in a very, very short period of time. Lakes have a natural progression. As I stated, they start off nutrient poor, and through many, many hundreds of years, eventually fill in. And we're talking thousands of years, fill in with nutrients, and eventually transition to more of a swamp. Lakes age. But what we've done in under 200 years is extraordinary. We've gone from a relatively nutrient-poor system to almost a super eutrophic system in the South Basin in just a couple hundred years. These are the loadings annually just to the North Basin. 13,000 something pounds from forest. Agriculture is around 2,000 pounds. Internal loading is around 18 point sources, 1,000. And of course, with any particular estimation, the margin of safety they put in there as well as to that unknown where other phosphorus sources are coming from. In septic system, again, many experts believe that this number's a little low. So that's the south. Again, here's the north. Here's the north. Here's the south. Here's the loading from the North Basin, calculated through modeling that the South Basin is receiving almost 3,000 something pounds annually from the North Basin. Agriculture is around 1,200. Developed land is around 29 again. Actually, developed land in the South Basin because of all of the infrastructure, impervious surfaces, things of that nature, is substantially higher. Septic systems, 470.5. I'm missing one slide here, folks. So, at the end of the day, this total maximum daily load for Chautauqua Lake has been established. Criteria have been set for percents of reductions, specifically to the wastewater treatment plant facilities, those reductions in annual phosphorus loading have to reduce somewhere between 80 and 80-something percent. Gentlemen, is that correct? Per facility. That's significant. Once this total maximum daily load report was completed, we have to determine a way to reach those reductions either by updating our current infrastructure for our treatment facilities or finding another way to reroute those and treat those in a different way, or build a whole new system. I must say that to do this is multi-millions of dollars. I believe Tom will get into more of those details. This is not a small undertaking, just looking at trying to address these recommendations. What we can say is that the recommendations that the TMDL outline are also recommendations identified in the Chautauqua Lake Management Plan. We are reducing phosphorus and nutrient loading from ag. We're reducing phosphorus and nutrient loading, other nutrient loading from developed land, etc. So we're doing the best we can up in the watershed. Now we have to look at point sources as well as the non-point sources, which we're going to get in more detail later, which is the septic systems, which we're still not sure of how to account for that percentage of loading.
And it's interesting to me that we get a group together on Saturday morning when a lot of us would have probably rather just rolled over and gone back to sleep. And it's a little interesting to me that the founding fathers of Chautauqua Institution felt that it was important to do this, to protect our lake. 1875, Mr. Miller and Mr. Vincent had no idea that today we'd get up to 10,000 people on any given day in the summertime at Chautauqua. They were also dedicated to the idea that they needed to control whatever influence was on Chautauqua Lake from whomever. Started out with privies at Chautauqua, went to water closets stationed around the institution, discovered in the 1870s that that wasn't working. Along about the 1880s, they started trying to figure out what they were going to do. By 1893, they'd built their first wastewater treatment plant. A lot of that we're still using today. Good concrete. The principle was that there should be no taint of the lake, that's a quote, no taint of the lake from anything having to do with Chautauqua. So it was very important. And one other fact is Chautauqua was the first community to be completely sewered. It meant that every building had to be connected to the sanitary sewer system. There are other sewers, obviously, the Greeks and Romans and so forth, but Chautauqua Institution felt it was important enough so that every single building was attached to the collection system. They put in 7 miles of collection system and built a sewage treatment plant, and in 1893 that cost them $34,000. Now in today's standard, that seemed like a lot of money then, and it doesn't seem significant to us, but what we're talking about doing at Chautauqua to take care of the problem, not only for phosphorus, but for nitrogen, is spending $6 million with no funding, all local share. There is a significant plan to completely sewer Chautauqua Lake. I think that's probably about 35 years late. I was a proponent of having a completely sewered lake when I started in this business, and I started in this business because I wanted to make a difference on Chautauqua Lake. It's not for the glory. And I hope I have made a difference. The wastewater plant that was built in 1893 was upgraded in the 1920s, upgraded again in the 1940s, in the 1960s. In 1978, I came along, and another upgrade was taking place at that time. And here we are 35 years later, and we're talking about doing it again, and this one's going to be significant. I felt that the wastewater plants on Chautauqua Lake should have been tertiary treatment when they were built to begin with, but they weren't. Technology today makes it a little bit easier to do that, but it's expensive, very expensive. The 3 wastewater plants that are on Chautauqua Lake were built and engineered and built and approved by DEC at the time to be the best technology we could afford to do, and at least the 2 major plants were funded at a level of 87.5%. 75% of the money came from the federal government, 12.5% came from the state government. I wish we still had that funding capability today, but we don't. The plants were made to take out biologically whatever pollutants, if you want to call it, nutrients is probably a better term, that they could down to what was termed a permit for the speedies permit was 30 parts per million. Now I've circulated a couple of vials, little petri dishes, that I'll let you look at again. If you would like, there is something in here, it's hard to see, but there's 2 milligrams in here of table salt. So if you spill it, it's not a problem. 2 milligrams of table salt dissolved in a liter of water becomes 2 milligrams per liter. 2 milligrams per liter is also the same as 2 parts per million. So if you take that and dissolve it, you can see how insignificant the amount of material is in there. And if you take that with the idea that you're going to get that out of the water, which happens to be a universal solvent, are we having a problem?
I'm just gonna bring that back up for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I stop it?
Nope,
Okay.
it stops itself.
If you take that and dissolve it in water, the universal solvent will dissolve it, and it's hard to get out. Now, that 2 milligrams per liter is also about what we're putting out for phosphorus now from our wastewater treatment plant. It was never designed to remove phosphorus. It does a pretty good job at removing phosphorus biologically. We take out about 50%. In the off season, of course, we have hardly any phosphorus being contributed. During the season, it's about 5 to 6 parts per million. We treat about 600,000 gallons of water every day at Chautauqua during the summer months. During the off season, our pipes from 1893 leak a bit, so we treat about 100,000 gallons of mostly water because there's hardly anybody there. The impact is significant, though, in the summer months because that's the growing season. That's the season weeds will grow. That's the season when the algae will bloom. Also, we've been analyzing for phosphorus at Chautauqua Utility District for about 14 years. We started during the State of the Lake report, work that was being done at the time, and we've continued on. Our phosphorus output has actually decreased. We've had a couple of programs that we had initiated to remove the laundry soap phosphorus was taken care of by the government. I put a push on to remove the dishwashing detergent phosphorus, which had a lot in it, and a number of people at Chautauqua carried that program for me. The Bird and Tree Club, actually, at Chautauqua carried that program for me, and we made a significant difference in the amount of phosphorus that people are actually contributing. Now, I might also add that I asked people at DEC, this phosphorus that's in our sewage, if it isn't coming from laundry detergent and it isn't coming from automatic dishwashing detergent, where's it coming from? The explanation was one word: pee, urine. We as humans consume a large amount of phosphorus. One of significance is soda pop. Another significance is the thing I passed around, this little pamphlet I passed around, that's off my vitamin bottle. If you look on the left-hand column of the things that are listed on there, the third from the bottom is phosphorus. That says it's 110 milligrams, right? Well, guess what happens if the body doesn't take up all of the phosphorus that we're pumping into it? That's going to come out in urine. And for every quart of water that we drink and expel, that's 100 parts per million dissolved in the water. Now, I know for a fact that we're not going to get people to quit paying. I also know for a fact that there's a lot of senior vitamins consumed at Chautauqua. And you can't do anything about that, okay? So what we're going to try to do is we've got a facility plan to comply with the requirements of the TMDL, and we're going to take those granules that are in there. For the first 5 years, we're allowed to get it by 50%. We're allowed to go from 2 down to 1 part per million. So we're going to cut that in half. That's going to be a magical thing because nobody told us how to do this without spending a large amount of money. We're going to try some things. Tom Carlson at the North District and the Utility District are going to try some things with chemical addition. It's going to be an experiment, but we're going to try. So, I mean, DEC can tell us, and the EPA can tell us that you're going to do this. Doing it is a little different than just being told to do it. It's going to be very similar for the towns to quit putting phosphorus from road runoff into the lake. It's easy to say, but how are you going to do that? Okay? Mostly you're going to spend a lot of money and a lot of effort. There's a plan underway also by the county government to completely sewer Chautauqua Lake. I'm an avid supporter of that. I'm not sure how we're going to do it, and I'm not sure where the money's going to come from, but it needs to be done. You can't take our little area here between Prendergrass Creek and Mayville and the South and Center Sewer District and leave the areas that are not covered by public sewer to fend for themselves, and the septic systems fail. No one knows it except maybe the people who lives on that property that the septic system has failed, unless someone complains and then something's done about it. It's better to have a public sewer around the lake. I wholeheartedly agree. I'm not sure it's feasible. In our case, they're talking about a study right now from the South and Center Sewer District to pump the sewage from Chautauqua Institution and from Mayville, the North District, to South and Center Sewer Plant and treat it there. Now, the study that's being done is still underway, so I don't have any results from that. Just to think about this, we're going to put a pipeline in, and we're going to put 3 million gallons from Chautauqua and 2 million gallons from Mayville and pump it 16 miles to the South and Center Sewer District. Just in cost of pipe dug in at, I estimated, $140 a foot, which is pretty close. We did a project at $130 a foot, and the engineers said that was too low an estimate, so they said 150. I'm going to put it in the middle at 140. Just at 140, to go to Celeron from Chautauqua is $12 million. Now, that's not counting right-of-ways. That's not counting pumping septic from the lake up to that pipeline. It's not counting anything except laying pipe down 394 and depositing 5 million gallons, which, by the way, amounts to 300,000 gallons in pipeline at any given moment. And you're going to have to add pump stations to do this. Pump stations, let's just estimate $1 million apiece. And I feel that every time you have a rise, you're going to have to pump it. Every time it goes down gravity into a pump station, you have to have another pump station. So there's at least 3 major rises between our elevation and just BOCES at 135 feet ahead above us to overcome. So it's going to be quite an engineering task. We're also looking at the possibility of going to Westfield, which happens to be downhill, fewer pump stations, but then you have something going down the escarpment. Who stops it at the bottom? If you got 5 million gallons, now that's a day, okay? That's not, you got 5 million gallons of sewage, raw sewage, untreated, heading down to Westfield, and at the bottom, something's got to happen. Either you're going to have a big fountain, or you're going to have to put something to slow it down, okay? A sewage fountain is not a good thing. I've seen them. They're not good. But even Westfield is 11 miles. That's $8.5 million just for pipeline. So it's significant. The $6 million at Chautauqua is going to be paid for in taxes And then the state comes along and puts a 2% tax cap on us, which makes it very interesting. The reason we're talking about doing it with taxes is there's no one there using any water in the off-season. If you do it based on water rates, the water rates are going to increase by over 400%. With the population of Chautauqua, we have roughly 1,300 customers, and we're figuring we're going to be somewhere around $400 per customer cost. We have to generate $500,000 a year to amortize a facility over a 30-year period. To generate $500,000 a year will double our current tax levy. We are a municipal corporation. We're completely separate from Chautauqua Institution. They are our best customer. There's been some estimates from the institution that would cost them an additional $70,000 or more per year as our best customer to comply with the same regulation we're talking about all the other property owners to be doing. So it's significant. And I might also add the reason we're not able to get any grant monies or any low interest loans is the fact that they're based on the median income of the properties. Those people who have a median income of the caliber of Chautauqua makes them ineligible for any funding. Most of them, over the last 3 years that I promoted this, are in agreement that it's important to do, and they're willing to do it. I'll find out. We're going to have a vote on some of the costs for design this summer. Find out how good a job I have done at selling this project and how much concern there is. I'll let you know. I don't know what else you want me to get into specifically, Bill. The idea is that the TMDL is not a maybe. I'm running over. The TMDL is real. The Speedies permit modification that we're supposed to get, I understand, is to be delivered to me by the end of this month. That starts the clock. I have 5 years to get down to 0.2 milligrams per liter. That was 2, I passed out. Okay? That's a significant change. I also believe, one last point, is that we also have a nitrogen problem, and I believe not too long from now we'll have a TMDL for nitrogen, most importantly ammonia nitrogen, on Chautauqua Lake, which we will all have to comply with, and I don't want to spend money twice. So what we're talking about doing is both ammonia and phosphorus removal in our project, which will probably take 3 to 5 years to complete. It has to be done within 5. So I will leave you with that. If you have anything more that you would like to ask me, I will be around. Thank you for the opportunity, and you may keep whatever you've got that I passed out.
I'm with the North Chautauqua Lake Sewer District. It's a county sewer district, takes in the north end of the lake. And also with being on the council for the town of Chautauqua, we do have a small package plan up here that takes in the condominiums. I've been asked to talk about the financial impact of the TMDL. Currently, as Tom stated, we need to get down to 1 milligram per liter phosphorus, most likely within a year after our permit's been modified. Our engineers hope to be able to do that for $250,000. And then, of course, within the 5 years, we're going to need to get down to the 0.2. That's going to be another $2.5 million to do that. We're going to need a significant construction at our plant to add a tertiary treatment. One thing, when we had an upgrade in '79, which added this area here and this area down through here to Chautauqua Institution, the old plant, which was built in '57 under the village of Mayville, was just a primary treatment. If you can imagine, everything that would go out your sewer pipe that would go into a barrel, whatever was settled out was taken care of. Anything that didn't settle was chlorinated and sent to the lake. Normally, primary treatment only removes about 60% So up until 79, only 60% of the sewage that was going down into the sewer plant was being removed and taken off in its form of sludge. 40% was going into the lake. 78, 79, they added biological treatment, which now we're removing 98 to 99%. And of course, this tertiary treatment will affect the phosphorus. And we also may have to deal with nitrogen. As far as the condominiums go, there's a package plant there. The estimated cost of that is $850,000. The significance of that is $850,000 is going to have to be paid for by 170 users. 170 users that come in here, that spend their summer here, that drive our tax base up. It's very significant to them. And currently, they're paying about $400 a year for sewer service. Doesn't seem like a lot, but this is going to send it. I don't know, Don, what did we figure for them?
Well, right now, it's illegal in the state of New York to even charge as much as we have.
Yeah.
About $1,600 a year.
But also, just a few more minutes, as Tom talked, there's a lot of plans going on to sewer the rest of the lake. The town of Chautauqua took a proactive approach and hired URS Corporation to take a look at what it would do to do away with that tertiary, or that plant here, send it over to Mayville, and to take in some of these other areas. The figures are outstanding. You're over $2,000 a year just for sewer. They did 4 different models. One was just upgrading the plant at the condominiums. The other models were adding vacuum sewers and or pumping it across the lake and expanding the plant here in Mayville to take care of that. $16 million. Where's that money coming from? As we talked, going to Westfield. Westfield will have to do some upgrades, but since Welch has moved out of town, they have a lot more capacity, and they actually buy phosphorus as part of their systems, which makes them comply with what they need to do. So, in closing, it's going to have a huge impact on the users. And as a personal note, I think we need to get outside the state road circle, because you've got a lot of tributaries and creeks and things that need to be looked at also, not just the people within that state road. I mean, it's going to have to take a concerted effort amongst a lot of different groups, organizations, and people to take care of this problem, just not the wastewater treatment plants. But.